The photographer who took the picture is well known to Sarah Ferguson as one of her tame photographers, and it appeared in the Sun newspaper, which has always been very close to Sarah Ferguson. This, in my opinion, is what made the revelation of sort of coming out of hiding so intriguing. Lauren, the insider, has investigated the possibility that this was a setup. It's possible that she was compensated for this. People were trying to attack her and a lot of money was flying around. It might have also been a realization that she had to sort of come out of hiding because she couldn't stay hidden forever. What if the woman who was previously accepted into the royal inner circle is disappearing because she knows exactly when the institution will fall apart rather than fleeing for safety? Whispered rumors gave way to tabloid headlines, and now it has descended into much darker area than anyone could have predicted. At the core of this developing disaster is Sarah Ferguson. The Duchess, who never seemed to leave the public eye, is all of a sudden back in the spotlight, but for completely unexpected reasons. An avalanche of skepticism and accusations has been sparked by a story promoted by The Sun, a tabloid with a long history of dubious allegiances. Why bring this tale back to life now? Why emphasize this specific angle, and most importantly, who will benefit? Because Sarah Ferguson's reappearance doesn't seem to be coincidence, this is quite unsettling. It seems planned, orchestrated, and nearly choreographed. Financial agreements may have been made before this article was made public, according to persistent rumors. That this was intentional engineering rather than authentic journalism, an unavoidable question arises if such appraisal turns out to be right. Was she pushed into the spotlight? Or did she deliberately plan her own re-entry at the ideal time? She didn't just vanish for more than 200 days. She experienced a basic recalibration while confined to the ultra-exclusive Old Tousey resort, where secrecy goes beyond simple privacy to become a commodity that can be traded. $14,000 per week to buy seclusion that verges on theatrical production. No unsecured photos, no chance encounters. Every move continued to be planned. However, there are numerous rumors that she will do a huge, pricey interview, or more accurately, a lucrative book or interview. How much pressure the palace and others are putting on her to refrain from doing so. Is this a bargaining strategy to get paid? Each reappearance had a deliberate delay, indicating someone positioning herself for the best possible response rather than someone escaping chaos. And beyond those hardened boundaries, what precisely was occupying her mind? A careful calculation, methodical, precise, $1.7 million. That figure continues reappearing as if it were a piece of encrypted data woven into the greater story, existential preservation or possibly strategic ammunition rather than just a cash transaction. Intelligence indicates that the telephone served as her only means of escape from a worsening scenario that was taking place in London at the same time. Secretive rhythms are used in communications, conversations about basic survival that go beyond simple recompense. Think about this. After 40 years of being a part of the royal system, a lady suddenly acts as if she is trying to free herself from a collapsing empire. Then comes April 16th. The contrived absence comes to an end. The alleged ghost reappears, but not quietly or casually. Witnesses did not report any respite. They expressed fear, a face that says, "I haven't come back," but everything comes to an end as if a significant agreement had been reached that went beyond the general public's knowledge, something significant and priceless. When financial encirclement allegedly started to intensify around her, the orchestration felt flawless. She emerges not too soon, not later, but precisely at that moment happen attitude or skillful choreography, essentially coming out of the prissy because it addressed her concerns about being homeless, didn't it? Additionally, it had this implied danger, as you mentioned. According to The Sun's briefing, she has the inside scoop on the royal family, is capable of causing significant harm, and was thinking of a £13 million for a documentary. What information about the royal family do you believe she would divulge that could be harmful? Because we have to recognize that what's happening here is genuine. This has to do with dominance. There is growing evidence that Sarah Ferguson has something cataclysmic, music rather than speculation or hypothesis, information that could be destructive rather than scandalous. Managing being close to authority for 40 years, Princess Diana's relationship, knowledge of King Charles's private circles, and most dangerously, her access to those the crown wants through Prince Andrew. Silenced forever, suddenly the idea of a $1.7 million exclusive accounts or published memories change from self-aggrandizement to strategic bargaining, a statement, or an acknowledgement. As an alternative, I speak. However, this process creates oppressive desperation since making the most of that arrangement goes beyond simply statting her biography. It requires blowing apart any remnants of her institutional ties. Perpetual estrangement is achieved with a single signature. Silence prolongs incarceration. Revelation might destroy everything that is left. What does she do then when both paths ensure destruction? She looks at precedent. Past people negotiating this cliff, those who spoke were punished, those who said nothing and vanished nevertheless. Here no defensive tactic emerges, only measured risks. Later on, further information is revealed. At the same time, she was planetary distracted by her isolation. Bit by bit, her existence was methodically dismantled. Spending the last 40 years with the royal family, given her close relationship with Diana, she might have a variety of anecdotes about Charles. She might have a clearer understanding of Andrew's relationship with Epstein. I'm sure she'll have heard tales about other royal family members. Company registrations, 6 private businesses were dissolved, sold off almost immediately, and not reduced, reorganized, or destroyed. At the same time, Sarah's trust, her charitable endeavor, closes. This is a purposeful retreat or containment rather than an accident. According to insider accounts, this went beyond simple economics. Tactical repositioning, reduced prominence, limited vulnerability, and consolidation were all part of it before something disastrous happened, and it did. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, her children, were included in stories that had no prior public support. There were accusations about meetings, chronologies that don't match previous confirmations, entanglements with unsettling consequences. Whether substantiated or not, degradation starts right away. Judicial confirmation is irrelevant to reputation, it responds to perception viscerally. Momentum is currently accelerating significantly. Discussions on Sarah Ferguson's encounter with unsurmountable reality continue, subdued but unrelenting. That decisions made in the past and private agreements have implications that go beyond her personally, and maybe this is where modern trends start. The isolation, the repression, the deliberate appearance. This appears as someone getting ready for devastation because it goes beyond someone avoiding prominence. Then inexplicably, an insight emerges that completely reorganizes understanding. A single letter from 2010 that was so unexpected and startling that it threatened to completely reframe the defensive myths she had built over decades. And are insider claims about such communication credible? Because that one correspondence from 2010 indicates a structural compromise rather than a marginal discrepancy, the phenomena where monitoring represents simply preparatory layers, then comprehension explodes absolutely. Concealment in the ruins of architecture. A communication that was allegedly sent from Sarah Ferguson's account contained language that sounded hostile, disengaged, rehabilitative, intimate, and destructive. I simply commit matrimonially and live in subordination. Because of the architectural implications that lie behind this transcended fleeting connection, rather than because of a superficial interpretation, that declaration alone has transmitted devastating reverberations permeating this narrative's totality. It appeared to be deliberate. This indicates comfort, familiarity, and relational calibration in contrast to years of reported estrangement. Additionally, there is the circumstantial factor, which has the potential to explode. This contact allegedly took place after corruption was confirmed, public disrepute was established, and an investigation had begun. So why continue to engage? Why strengthen ties? Uncomfortable juxtaposition gives way to a far more deliberate narrative development. Because insiders convey with increasing conviction that this went beyond the possibility of mere acquaintance, it required reliance, financial dependence, and concealed provisions that remained purposefully classified arrangements functioning after visible documentation, but leaving traces through private correspondence. If verification confirms, all disputes and well-stated statements from earlier chapters become algorithmic placement instead of authentication. However, such correspondence is isolated since there are waves of synchronous documentation. Claimed allusions to private gatherings, lavish transportation arrangements, even an unintentional mention of afternoon refreshments at aristocratic homes, insignificant details, and harmless on their own. Together they make up architecture that promotes integration rather than retreat, engagement rather than disassociation, and the element causing the greatest amount of disturbance, references to her offspring. Taking part in this gravitational field, Princess Eugenie and Princess Beatrice, designations that were never expected to cross this history, are now part of its expanding magnetic pole. Intentional or indirect, verified or hypothetical implication produces enough force to cause administrative catastrophe and societal devastation. Because this affects more than just Sarah Ferguson, it is permanent, and just as this storm begins to disintegrate, new devastation appears, much more powerful, much more deafening, and difficult to minimize. Pre-dawn hours on February 18, 2026, residents of Sandringham, what was once a customary ritual remembrance becomes something quite different. Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is officially apprehended, not questioned and not summoned. The metaphorical resonance of precisely 8 anti-medium reaches astounding proportions. The person who previously safeguarded by inheritance, currently in opposition to the government's enforcement mechanism. The charges of justification are closely connected by the same 2026 documentation. Sarah Ferguson's circumstances are disassembled by cascade. Declarations about privileged communication shifted laterally. According to reports, sensitive materials were distributed to receivers who had illegal authorization. This goes beyond controversy. As of right now, this is an official investigation, and in Sarah Ferguson's case, this moment completely recalibrates everything because the defensive superstructure that was in place deteriorates. The implicit organizational shelter provided by a royal relationship began to weaken. The private assurances that were communicated in institutional chambers declined. Communication conveys clear certainty when the government's position ostensibly favors allowing prosecutorial advancement. Everyone's invulnerability ends. At that moment, understanding of her mountain solitude is sparked. This went beyond withdrawal from therapy. This was thoughtful preparation, strong conditions that enable synchronization of thought arrangements at the same time as urban breakdown. Mobilizing prosecutorial representation, documentary evidence is being investigated, building relationships. In the meantime, she continues to be inconspicuous on the outside but active on the inside because personal choices currently have a significant impact. Every hesitancy seems intentional. Every visibility feels significant. According to reports, prosecutors step up their investigation, looking beyond Andrew alone and onto anyone who would have enabled or facilitated alleged communication transactions. That question, that incessant interrogative that keeps coming up with unresolved clarity, endures like an obsessional ghost. What did Sarah Ferguson know? When exactly did comprehension start to emerge? Because if ignorance won out, what explains the acceleration of today? What clarifies one's 7 million authorizations for resources suspended in the middle of the atmosphere, like the ultimate gambit waiting to be deployed? What causes sudden commercial liquidation? Philanthropic dismissal? Orchestrated return followed suppression? It reads somewhat haphazardly put together. It appears to be responsive. As an alternative, be cautious due to uncomfortable authentication when dealing with this situation. The tale goes beyond revelations. It has to do with dominance. Dominance in relation to documentation before documentation attains supremacy. Amplified amplification comes after articulation. Disclosure is transformed into a value tool because institutional perception is crucial. Her initial articulation of authenticity frequently transforms into a single authentication with persistence, which shifts her perspective. Explain and deal with institutional expulsion that cannot be reversed. Terminating a final institutional relationship and becoming institutional alienation with a chronicle that may cause overall instability but ultimately leads to solitude. Maintain silence and see gradual annihilation. Appellation by appellation, correspondence by correspondence, and documentation by documentation. Her situation changed on its own. Every trajectory ends in harm only. There is no such thing as invulnerability. Concurrent prosecutorial deepening and only consequences. Documented appearance. Obsession with the community. Changing into something more like to obsession. The compression gets stronger. For compromised formulations, there is still no allowance. There is no room for deliberate opacity. What happens next will determine not only her path, but also how history is interpreted. Was she a symbol of entrapment? Alternatively, persistent contributor due to the terminal sequence's considerable incompleteness and lack of execution. Backstage decisions are still coming to pass somewhere. Transactions that were negotiated. Endure, boundaries become more firmly established, and negative sincerity is maintained throughout. Observation can include only observation that is allowed. Everything else remains in the shadow of the interior. If Sarah Ferguson finds genuine articulation, this carefully balanced planetary ecosystem that is momentarily halted eventually fractures.